You are listening to Inside the Notes. I'm your host, Erica Block. Here we have the opportunity to listen to the stories that connect our musical family tree. First-hand accounts of performances, musicians, and mentors that shape the way we listen, learn, and teach. On today's episode, we are chatting with Swiss-born conductor Christoph-Mathias Mueller. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you very much for having me.
I'd love to start off with a huge congratulations. Christoph's new recording, which highlights the works of Alexander Veprik and performed by the BBC National Orchestra of Wales, has just won the Opus Classic Award for Best Symphonic Recording of the 20th and 21st century. So exciting. Incredible.
Indeed, yeah. Thank you very much.
I found your recording incredibly inspiring and his music totally captivating. How did you learn about his music? What was the paths that crossed for you?
I had recorded several discs already with Russian repertoire, and I was looking for a new repertoire for a new disc, and I wanted to continue this Russian line, and my recording company was very interested in finding some repertoire which is not done yet or has not been discovered yet. And I had a wonderful collaborator when I was music director in my orchestra in Göttingen. And she, Dr. Ina Klause, she wrote a dissertation and got a prize for it about music and Gulag. And she pointed me to a composer, Alexander Veprik, which I've never heard before. And maybe we talk later about it. I have a huge LP collection and CD collection. I know, and I already when I was young, I started listening to Russian music, and I've never heard of that name. And then I started reading up on him, and it turns out that, for example, Toscanini performed his music, Mitropoulos performed his music, Hermann Scherchen. So these are three of my big conducting heroes, and all in the 20s and beginning 30s. And so I was very intrigued because this music had disappeared completely. And so we started to try to find the music. We found the scores in Russian archives, which they actually sent to us. And then I produced the orchestra material, which took a long time. It was very complicated. And then I started performing then with my orchestra in front of the Göttingen audience. And the musicians loved it, and the audience loved it. And then the recording was planned to do in Göttingen, but sometimes things don't work out as they should. It took a little bit longer. And so I was able at the end to record this wonderful music with the BBC National Orchestra of Wales. And there, too, the musicians loved the music. And what was important to me also is that not just recording the music, but also have musicology background, or let's say, I didn't want to just have a CD because, after half a year, a CD disappears. Yep. And there are so many new CDs coming out. So I organized a seminar, a symposium. I had 8 very important and wonderful musicologists talk and actually learn about the music and then talk about it with their huge background. And then I co-edited a book about the orchestral music of Veprik. So it's a whole package. And the goal was somehow to bring this music out of oblivion, I would say. And so that's why this prize is a wonderful thing, I have to say, because it will help this endeavor.
Absolutely. It will just bring more light to the whole project and hopefully more listeners. So since he was being performed in the 20s and 30s, what do you think, what happened? How did it dissolve?
Well, it's a very sad story. He was born in 1898, and so he was in his 20s when the press got notice of him, and he was usually or very often called, together with Shostakovich, as one of the brightest stars of the young Soviet Union. And he became a professor at the Moscow Conservatory already in the 20s. He was the youngest ever appointed teacher at the conservatory in Moscow. And the state of the young Soviet state sent him to travel to Europe, where he met Schönberg, Hindemith, Ravel, because he wanted to learn about their teaching methods, and he wanted to bring them back to the Soviet Union. So he was really into it and proud. And but very soon, already in 1929, he was actually he was part of a school which Yasha Nemtsov, a German Jewish musicologist, calls the New Jewish School. And there you had Achron in it, and you had the brothers Crane in it. And Achron, people sometimes know because Heifetz plays one piece of Achron, recorded. So one knows this name a little bit. Already in 1929, the anti-Semitic push got very strong. For example, Veprik had to change titles of his pieces from like Jewish pieces to all of a sudden was 5 little pieces and things like that. Terror grew and grew, of course. And 1943, all the Jewish teachers got dismissed from the schools, from the conservatory in Moscow. He went then to Kyrgyzstan, kind of I would say a flight, you could call it, or at least he went there to collect music samples of folklore. And then 1950, he was commissioned to write a national opera of Kyrgyzstan together with 2 colleagues. And one is not completely sure, but it seems that these 2 colleagues were jealous and denounced him. And he got a sentence of 8 years of Gulag, so hard labor in the Siberian taiga. It's like, minus 40 degrees Celsius. He had to be there for 4 years. After Stalin died, they let him go, but his health was destroyed. He lived another 4 years. He barely wrote anything anymore. And then he died in 1958.
Wow.
And what is striking, not just in his case, but in many other cases of composers who were in the Gulag, actually there were, as we know, of 66 composers who were in the Gulag. And a lot of times people think the Gulag was just for maybe writers and so, and the musicians were kind of saved from it. It's not true. They are completely forgotten. So even after their ordeal in the Gulag, they had no social contact. Some composers, they were not allowed to go back to the big cities. They had to go somewhere in the provinces. They were not allowed to be performed. And even after their death, the silence was complete.
Wow.
So it's this punishment lasts for some of them until now.
Wow.
So I felt very passionate about him, as you might feel, that it is really maybe one of the duties or one of the things as a musician you can do, besides performing the classics and, carry on a certain tradition, but also to something which goes beyond music.
Absolutely. You're basically reviving a soul and a lost
Yeah.
voice.
That's a very nice.
Yeah, and kind of creating a second life for something that shouldn't have been snuffed out early in the first place. And his music is stunning. And there's a lot of Shostakovich. There's a lot of those colors and those sounds and that nationalism that was going on at that time that you can hear.
Yeah, what fascinated me was there is a certain style. At the same time, he has, I find, his own voice, like a certain, of course, a Jewish melos, you could call it. And he never lost that, even if you think he would have been much smarter to write pieces which were very folkloristic and not dissonant at all. But he still kept a certain gruffiness, I don't know if you can say that, like a certain, let's say, Bartokian, Kodai side of a lot of fourth, fifth in his harmonies, and this Jewish melos, which is undoubtedly there. And so I find that quite astonishing, actually. So this mix has something very attractive, and his orchestrations are fabulous. He was a teacher of orchestration, but that's something when you discover music for the first time and you look at scores which have not been played or played maybe once. So there are no notations, no indications whatsoever. And he was not very precise, I have to say, in his tempo indications. There are no metronome marks. So you always, the first time, you have to kind of judge by yourself. how is the basic tempo, how is this the feeling of the music, all that. And in the orchestrations, he's very refined. For example, you have a main voice, but he writes it in pianissimo senza espressione. And you have a secondary voice, which is much louder, noted much louder. Is that a mistake?
Right.
You don't know, in the edition, maybe there are a lot of mistakes, or it's on purpose, or did he think the instrument which he put very loudly, maybe he thought it's too soft? So you have to judge constantly and make decisions. And of course, that's also something very interesting for a conductor to do.
Especially when one of these unplayed works. So I was going to ask, that is such a challenge. And when you're going to a visiting orchestra, who's not your home orchestra, when you were playing, doing the recording with BBC, what was that process? Did you get a lot of rehearsal? Did you send a million notes to people? Did you mark everything up? Like, how do you go through the whole journey you went through and then pass that on in a quick recording?
I was lucky that I had performed these pieces with my orchestra before. But as usual with an English orchestra, and I have worked with the BBC Wales before, so I knew this orchestra is first a very good orchestra, of course, but they also play with passion. They are open. You come there, you have 3 days. Each day has 2 sessions of 3 hours, and there is no rehearsal whatsoever. You start and it's record.
Wow.
That's how it works. And they are so quick. But of course, you have to have a very clear, strong idea how the music goes. Otherwise, you're lost. You don't have time to find out.
Right.
And so we had 15 minutes to spare at the end for the recording session. And but of course, it helped that the musicians really loved the music. They really dug into it. And I hope you can hear that in the recording.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's what is kind of transcends and translates through is it's incredibly exciting and incredibly beautiful and sad. And it has all of these emotions. It comes right through. But it's such a challenge to try and get all of that organized and get it out. And I did not know there was no rehearsal. That's incredible.
Yeah. And the thing is, in the recordings, I find you have to, as a conductor, you have to give everything. It's so tiring, you could say. I mean, you have to really go for it, and even if there is no audience. So it's very good for Corona now. I practice that.
It's so true. Oh my gosh. Well, I would love to kind of go backwards now that we know what, the most recent project is. I'd love to talk about the beginning because to me, you're the most enthusiastic musician I know, and your passion for music radiates off of you. And I find it incredibly contagious and fun. And I've had so many experiences with you where I've left pumped up and, ready to get back at it. Can you recall when you realized that this is it for you? Like you love music so much, this is what you're doing, no questions asked?
The scary thing is that I always knew it. There is no defining moment. I come from a family which, my parents were teachers, primary school teachers, but my father knows a lot of languages, so he was constantly learning and expanding his horizon. My mother taught special needs kids, so they were very open and interested. But before them, they were farmers, and it's no music background whatsoever. And I don't know what happened somehow, but we always loved to sing in the family, and then we started to play recorder quartets. And they told me that, well, I even remember that I was terrible because I started to criticize my mother, you play a wrong note there. And so apparently I had a certain, a gene in me.
Yes.
So, but from beginning on, music was something, I learned the piano by myself. That was the first, after the recorder. I started with violin rather late. I was 9 years old, and but my mother told me that was something which struck her, that I seemed to not play out of tune. Like when she listened to others, young children, it was just not always really pretty to listen to. But somehow that was something I had, and from that moment on, it was very clear to me. I went to a high school where I had Greek and Latin, and I was let's say, I got prepared to university, I would say,
Mm-hmm.
like, a decent job,
Right.
I would say. But I always had the support of my parents also, I have to say. They never questioned or never wondered if that's a safe choice or so. They always supported me. And I had wonderful teachers. Like, it seems a very natural development somehow.
It's beautiful, and it's so fun when it's just all you've ever loved, and then everything unfolds in front of you.
Mm.
So you have more recordings, more CDs than any human being who's ever lived. What was
Oh,
your favorite recordings when you were little? When you were just starting to get recordings, what did you wear out because you listened to it so much?
my first LP was Peter and the Wolf, indeed. And it had a wonderful German speaker, Matthias Wiemann, who had this sonorous voice, and I loved this recording. I still think it's a fabulous recording. And it was also the first symphony concert I attended. The Tonhalle Orchestra in Zurich, they started with children's concerts, and that was, 1974 or so. That was something new.
Hmm.
And it was Gerd Albrecht, a German conductor, who started to have these concerts and talk to the audience, talk to the children. And that was something which was not usual at that time. And so I remember when he presented the wolf, the horns. I was sitting maybe in the seventh row, and so they ba ba da 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 dee, da, and so
Yeah.
I said, "Oh, beautiful!" And he heard it, and he turned around and said, "Yes, that's it." I was, and still every time I conduct this piece, I think of that moment, and I love these chords in the horns,
Oh,
with the
that's
wolf.
that's incredible. I love it. So you started as a violinist and you went to university for violin. What was the tipping point that told you conducting is the journey?
My best friend, she observed me in high school, and the high school teacher, for whatever reason, he gave every student, we were 13 years old, a baton and said, "Now conduct." And he wanted to see. And she said, they all kind of did something weird, but I took the baton and it looked like that's it. I don't remember that, I have to say. But even when I started my studies as a violinist, I got asked to conduct an ensemble for contemporary music, which I found was a very bold choice of them to ask me to do that
Yeah.
without any experience. But it turns out that the cellist is now a member of the Berlin Philharmonics, the clarinetist is now a member of the opera in Zurich. So very good
Wow.
people. And I was very lucky. I learned really hard repertoire. We did post-serial music mainly,
Wow.
but it was excellent for conducting, like patterns and listening and all that.
Yeah.
And but I continued with my studies in violin, and then I had a wonderful teacher, Schneeberger. For example, he premiered the Bartok First Violin Concerto. He
Wow.
premiered the Frank Martin Violin Concerto, etc. He was a very important player in Switzerland, maybe the most important violinist in the 20th century in Switzerland. And then I studied with Walter Levin from the La Salle Quartet.
Mhm.
And he said, I mean, if you want to become a conductor, maybe you should consider going to the States. And he wrote to a friend of his, Gerhard Samuel, who is a professor in Cincinnati.
Mhm.
And Samuel came to Germany to conduct an orchestra. I met him and I showed him a video. And he said, "That looks good. I will
Wow.
accept you in my class." And so at that moment, I knew I wanted to be a conductor, but I was still playing the violin. I earned good money as a
Mhm.
violinist, even. I played in the Gustav Mahler Youth Orchestra. And then it was funny because I played under Michael Gielen, who used to be the music director of the Cincinnati Symphony. And I
Yeah.
talked to him. He said, well, let me also write to you a little recommendation to Cincinnati. And that's how I got an assistantship,
Wow.
because my parents could not really afford the high fees in the States.
Right.
And so I was very lucky that also financially I was able to come to the States. From that moment on, I have to say, I took my violin to Cincinnati. You never know if that's the Swiss side of
Exactly.
me or maybe my parents' side. Like, you have to have a backup plan. And then after I finished in Cincinnati and I came to Tanglewood as a conducting fellow, I played in the Vermont Symphony Orchestra because I have to note it.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
Yeah, from Cincinnati, in Tanglewood, I met someone whom, I fell in love with, and I moved with all my things from Cincinnati within 3 days to Boston, and so I had to make a living somehow. So that's why I played in the Vermont Symphony for a few
Wow,
months.
that's incredible.
But then I had recorded. I had made a recording with Dimitri Ashkenazy, who is the son of Vladimir Ashkenazy, and the recording turned out quite well, I thought. But I wanted to know what I can improve, so I wrote a letter to Vladimir Ashkenazy just to say, could you give me some pointers? What you think? Can you? And a few days later, the phone rings, and I pick up and I say, hello. And there is this is Vova. And I said, Vova, what? Vova? Yeah, Vova Ashkenazi. And I was like, I almost dropped the phone. And he said, the recording is very interesting. Would you like to become my assistant?
Wow.
In Berlin with the Deutsche Symphonieorchester. And that was a tipping point for me, because then I thought, violin, that's it.
Yeah.
I have to decide now.
Yes.
And that's what I did. So
Wow.
for a while, I still played the violin on Christmas, and now the violin is gathering dust.
So what was the situation that got you to do that recording with Dmitri Ashkenazy?
Good question. I knew Dimitri Ashkenazy, and we talked about this recording, and then there was a Swiss label, and they said, okay, let's do that recording. I said, we could try to do this recording in Cincinnati with the student orchestra, because you have students, the violin players, they were from Dorothy DeLay. Dorothy DeLay was the teacher of them. You had great teachers. You had fabulous students. And that's what we did. We recorded this recording in 3 days. I paid donuts. I paid the musicians a little fee. And the radio station, the public radio station, they recorded the whole thing. And we did a master. And I could just hand over to the Swiss recording company a finished product.
That's incredible.
And that was the wonderful thing in the States. You have this, or of an American university, you have these possibilities to, I hope it's still the case, to work together, find possibilities, and I think I was very lucky to be able to use that, or that I was allowed to, actually.
Absolutely. And it was a turning point, because that is what you had to present for Vladimir.
I organized everything. So, I have to say that one thing I'm proud of, that I worked for the things, really. And I always found that the things came at the right moment also. And somehow I felt that most of the times I deserved the things, although of course I need a lot of luck all the time. That's but it was always it felt like a good balance somehow.
And conductors, I think, until more recently, are the most entrepreneurial of all the different outlets in the orchestral experience, because you're having to find ways to connect and put yourself out there. So obviously you're seeing these projects through to the end. You're going through the entire process, and then you get a great result, and of course then are rewarded. But the journey is a lot of work in the background.
Yeah, I'm lucky that I got rewarded sometimes, but I have a project because I believe in the music, and I want to share that with as many people as possible. So that was always a driving force also.
So when you got to Deutsches Symphonieorchester Berlin and you had Ashkenazy there, what was your experience working with him? What kind of conductor and what kind of a leader was he, and how did that influence you?
Ashkenazy is, first of all, is a lovely person. And he was completely eye to eye with me. Like, there was never a pretentiousness. And so what we would do, he would rehearse, and in the intermission, I would take notes. And in the intermission, I would go to him and say, here, maybe balance there. And he completely trusted me. So in the second half of the rehearsal, he would go there and correct the things. It was amazing. I mean, and so that was a lovely, lovely experience with him. But you know how that happens, and so I conducted there, or I was mainly an assistant, I have to say, and then Abbado was looking for an assistant for a tour of the orchestra because he needed somebody for Mahler's Second Symphony, where you have backstage orchestra, and so they invited me to go on that tour with the Berlin Philharmonics and Abbado. And so I met musicians there, and they knew about my background about conducting contemporary music.
Mm-hmm.
So the Philharmonics, they had an ensemble called Sharon Ensemble, where they did Schubert octet, for example, but they also did, let's say, Ligeti, chamber symphony, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So they asked me to conduct them. And I did that for almost 3 years, a lot. And I was very, I mean, you have the top musicians, playing this music, and to learn, that was unbelievable. And one of these concerts at the Salzburg Easter Festival, Abbado was in the audience. And so he came backstage, said, very, very nice, very nice. And so I said, would you mind if I could meet you, and maybe you can give me some input, what I can improve, or you can meet Berlin Philharmonic, backstage. Okay, so that's what I did a few weeks later. And then he said, yeah, no, very good, very good. Do you want to become my assistant with Gustav Mahler Youth Orchestra? And I cannot tell you how I walked out of that room. I mean, it was like flying.
Yeah, exactly.
And then he got very sick. That summer, he had this cancer, and nobody knew what would happen. So I started as an assistant conductor to the Gustav Mahler Youth Orchestra, but not with Abbado first. But the first conductor was Maurice Jansons. I prepared the orchestra for Maurice Jansons. Then I prepared the orchestra for Ivan Fischer, then for Welser Möst. And then came Abbado. And that was interesting, because Abbado was somebody who didn't give second chances. And I saw that later on, if you don't deliver in the first 10 seconds, that was it. And so I prepared Mahler 9 for him. The orchestra was ready, and so I remember very well, in Bolzano, he came into the orchestra room alone. And I said, we are prepared. You want to take over? He said, no, you conduct. And I conducted the whole Mahler 9th Symphony with Abbado alone in the audience.
Wow.
And from that moment on, he said, that was good. And from that moment on, we worked together for almost 5 years.
Wow, that's incredible.
But a scary moment.
So that's a perfect segue. Those moments, that one especially, you knew that it was an important moment because you knew how he interacted. You knew he was quick to judge. And then he says, no, you do it. Do you have a way to dive into your brain and not let the scary part get to you? Like, how do you focus right away when the moment's like that, right on the line?
I wish I could tell you that from a young age on, I had no nerves and that would perfect. I have to tell you that I was only able these past years really to find this calm. It's like when you're a guest conductor, you come in front of an orchestra, they don't know you, and many things can go wrong. Maybe they have had a horrible breakfast, the mood is bad. I don't know.
Yeah.
And to not be affected by that, just to come there and take care of the music. The first impulse as a young conductor is, we make music together, let's, and the next one is maybe, let's love each other. And the next is, please like me, and it's deadly. And you have to develop a certain thicker skin, of course, but indeed, to focus completely on the music, it's something I had to learn. And now I'm able to do that, but it took me a long time.
And when those moments are happening in the moment, sometimes you're blissfully unaware that he's in the audience or that this is happening or that's happening. But when he walks in behind you and sits down, there's no way of getting out of it. He's going to be there.
Yeah, luckily in important moments I was able to focus, but sometimes,
Yeah.
it happened when I was a young conductor that I felt a little bit insecure, and then after 3 minutes, with this orchestra that will not work, and you have to spend another 4 days or 3 4 days with them, and uh, everybody's professional, so one tries to do, at the concerts, to give their best, and me too, and one parts amicably, but forever usually.
Right. Exactly. So tell us a little bit more about the Gustav Mahler Youth Orchestra, because it's so unique, and to Europe. The US doesn't have anything quite the same way, because you were a member of it as a student, and then
Yeah.
turning around and being the conductor. What are the challenges, and what are the amazing things about it?
I think Abbado was very instrumental in developing these youth orchestra types, and on a very high level.
Hmm.
He started with the European Union Youth Orchestra, and all the musicians had to be members of a European country in the European Union. So Switzerland, for example, was not part of it, and all the Eastern Bloc countries, of course, not at all. And so Abado felt that it would be important for integration of Europe. There was a political idea behind it, or idealistical idea behind it. It would be good to have an orchestra. He called it Gustav Mahler Orchestra because Gustav Mahler, worked in both worlds. He was born in Austrian Empire, but now in Bohemia,
Right.
and then he worked in Brno and etc. in Prague, and so in that orchestra, it was possible for all European countries to play in that orchestra. So it was the first time I played in 91, I think. And it was the first time I met Czech musicians, young Czech musicians, or Hungarian musicians, because before them they didn't show up in the universities, of course.
Right.
And so, and that was the wonderful thing. And the selection process was very, very demanding, very cruel also. I mean, there was always a committee traveling to different countries where
Hmm.
they would audition people and they would videotape them, and then there was a selection. And you can imagine, I mean, top players from all over Europe, young players, they all wanted to play in that orchestra
Hmm.
because the orchestra played in great halls. And I was very lucky also, to play in the Salzburg Festival, and Konzertgebouw, all that. I mean, that's a wonderful opportunity. And of course,
Absolutely.
networking, I mean, one cannot deny it, is also very important.
Absolutely.
So, but there are two schools of thought, because for me, playing in the Gustav Mahler Youth Orchestra was something which seemed like an ideal
Hmm.
of orchestra playing. Everybody reaches for the same goal, for this magical moment of a concert. One plays together, one tries to listen to each other, and that was wonderful. And there was one famous conductor. They're both still alive. Two conductors. One said, this is wonderful, the Mahler Orchestra, but then this one musician gets a professional job. He sits next to an older colleague. This older colleague will tell him, "Oh, don't move that much." Yeah, and then after 2 or 3 weeks, you start to get into the habit of you lose the enjoyment of playing together. You think only about yourself. Don't disturb too much and all that, and you will have a horrible life. And the other conductor said, what is planted here in this youth orchestra, this is something you have to carry on, and you will bring it into the other orchestras and infect.
Hmm.
Sorry for this word. It just came to mind. But to spread. Oh, that's also terrible. Well, you know what I mean. To bring this joy of making music together in an orchestra to the also older colleagues who did not have the luck of this kind of experience. And I'm an optimist in that sense, that I see that the first um, outcome is a very possible outcome, but I always hope for the second outcome. And
Absolutely.
I would say when you observe the orchestras now, in Europe especially, I when I started conducting in Europe in the 90s, you still had this kind of very tough orchestra musicians well, I would say you had to try to find the joy in music,
Right.
and help them find it again.
Right.
And nowadays, the orchestras are much better self-motivated. And I
Hmm.
think it is also part of this youth orchestra movement, which started with Abbado, I would say.
It's fantastic. I love that you brought up kind of the ideal of the magical moments, because that's my favorite part of all of this. I know you have many, but can you think of just one or two experiences of someone said, what was a concert that kind of riveted you and brought that magic to you that you
Mhm.
participated in, where you were like, you just left the stage so pumped and thinking I was touched and others were touched.
Mhm. For a long time, I was very critical and self-critical. After a concert, the first thing which came into my mind when I stopped, this place and this place and this place, I had to learn to not do that.
Hmm.
So, to actually enjoy the moment. And the next step was then to actually sometimes have that feeling that was now something, a communal experience, I would say, like where the musicians, I, and the audience were transported.
Yeah.
Um, and it's unpredictable. You don't know when that happens. Sometimes a repertoire helps with it. And
Hmm.
let's say when I conducted Lied von der Erde by Mahler, that's one of these pieces where I just cannot help it. It's like, and where I hope that this happens,
Yes.
this thing, and it did happen. So so I was very lucky.
It's a really important, I think, piece of our experience in music, and when you have those experiences, you find yourself kind of growing towards the next one, and
Mm.
they exist to you for that
Mm.
purpose.
Sometimes it also happens, for example, with a Haydn symphony. It's
Hmm.
a I like to play sometimes one of the late Haydn symphonies at the end of a concert, because I'm convinced that this music has such a power and energy that it lifts the people. And let's say when I do the last one, 104, that's one of these pieces also where when everything comes together, the musicians are digging in and understanding my stylistic demands which I want,
Yeah,
and then there is like, that makes me so happy. I mean, it's it lifts off the piece, and at the end, and together with the audience, and they cannot help them, let's say, stand up or cheer. There's such an energy. So it's not only music which is closer in time to us,
yeah.
but also music which I find incredible. You have music which is so old, and still touches us.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's incredible because it can be any time and it can be any piece and any performer, but it's kind of more the magic of everyone connecting, and the group connecting together that creates this third dimension.
And sometimes you have a soloist which transports you. I remember I had Nikolai Demidenko, a wonderful pianist, and we did Scriabin piano concerto together. And the second movement has very soft strings. And he told me, let's try to play as soft as possible. And I was pushed. So I said, okay, let's try that. And I'm eternally grateful for him because it was absolutely magical, this moment, because of him. And then he played. I mean, I will never forget how he played, and this kind of things, um, unforgettable.
And then the next time that you work on that piece, that of course is the first thing that comes to your mind.
Indeed, indeed. And I hope I can give that. I can. Um, these kind of experiences, I was very lucky to have with this also when I go to concerts, not as a performer but as a listener, and hear Abbado perform, and his recordings don't do justice to his magic, what he had. Really, there are very few recordings which really capture that, but in concert I was absolutely, you would be spellbound at the end. And also this kind of feeling, I hope to be able to give to a new audience, let's say, through my experiences. I don't say that I'm an Abbado, I'm a Christoph-Mathias Mueller. Well, but at the same time, there is something like this feeling. I had that feeling, and I want people to have that feeling again.
Exactly. And I think that's what the quest is. That's what
Mm.
we're trying to figure out how to keep doing, and how to find ways to show with your body and with words to get the orchestra to feel you, so that the complete package can go out. And
Mm.
that's the great mystery. So how did, from going into these amazing experiences as assistant directors and conductors and having mentors, to then becoming your own artistic director and musical director, and now it's all your choices. What were there's so many challenges to that role,
Mm.
but I feel like programming was probably one of your favorite aspects of it. What kinds of things were you excited to do and choose as you had that tenure?
Well, actually, the first music directorship I had was with the Cairo Symphony Orchestra.
Oh, wow.
That was during my time with Abbado. They asked me, that was 2004, to come for one season. I knew already that I would be music director in Göttingen, in Germany. So I went to Cairo, and I would not miss it for the world. It was an incredible experience. First, when they asked me, I had no idea that there is an orchestra. In
Yeah.
my Eurocentric arrogance, I would say. And there I came to have, they had since 1871, since the opening of the Suez
Wow.
Canal, they had an opera, and the opera was an exact copy of the Scala. And then 1971, it burned down. Nobody knows why. And then 1982, they rebuilt a whole opera house with a library, a music library, kind of an island, which is, the Nile is on both sides, kind of incredible. And they have two orchestras, an opera orchestra and a symphony orchestra. And so I went there, and it was incredible what they have in infrastructure. Of course, the live rhythm is sometimes a little bit detrimental to orchestra discipline, I would say,
Yeah.
because the evenings are lovely. You go out with friends at 11 o'clock, you sit, you smoke a lovely water pipe, and you have fresh juice, mango juice and strawberry juice from Egypt. It's wonderful. And then some musicians would go on cruises and play string quartets, until 3 o'clock in the morning. And the next
Wow.
day at 10 o'clock, they have an orchestra rehearsal. So it's sometimes a little bit difficult, but they were lovely people, incredibly nice. And I still have friends there, and it's, a wonderful thing. But then after that 1 year, I came to Germany. And of course, I thought it would be great to have some elements of Germany in Egypt. And sometimes I thought it would be great to have a little bit of Egypt also in Germany.
Absolutely.
Just, a little bit of more relaxed attitude. But the job of a music director of a middle-sized German orchestra is quite a challenging one. You have to conduct a lot, because you have guest conductors, but in general, I'm the cheapest guest conductor, so I have to do a lot. So
Right.
sometimes I did 65, 70 concerts a season with, I would say, 40 different programs. It's insane. I mean, I learned
Wow.
so much repertoire. Um,
Wow.
and and then the programming, of course, is it was my job, and that's indeed, as you said, one of my great loves. In a program, I want to have connections. Sometimes they're obvious,
Mhm.
but sometimes they're also not obvious. And sometimes I program something and I realize that there are connections only after the fact, which is very curious, very strange sometimes.
Yes.
And then you realize that a lot of music is like goes on in our brains subconsciously. Somehow we make these connections. And then there is also a season to plan. So I wanted to have a certain overall form of the season, a
Mhm.
theme maybe, or like sometimes not obvious. I don't like obvious things, but like a little intellectual challenge, let's say.
Yeah.
And then there is an aspect also of improving the orchestra. I mean, there is a certain, as the chief conductor, I'm kind of the hygienist, what do you say?
Yeah.
Like of
Yeah.
the orchestra, like I'm the one who has to repeat constantly the same things, please don't start talking when I stop conducting, things like that. Yeah,
Right.
it's, until that becomes the DNA of the orchestra. And certain things, I think that's a less of a problem in American orchestra, but in German orchestra, sometimes there is a lot of exchange, so that's important to impose. And but also technically, let's say I chose an American season, for example, where I played music which is never played again in the States, which is a shame. Let's say William Schumann, Ned Rorem, Walter Piston. I did even sessions, I mean, really.
Wow.
And this is technically very challenging because it's written for an American, certain virtuose orchestra, like in New York, etc. And that I programmed that on, in particular, to bring the orchestra further, like to advance the virtuosic side of it. And recordings were also an important part because, you know, musicians, they trust me to a certain extent, but when the sound engineer tells them, that is not together, and so that helps. Sometimes they
Yeah.
say, oh, maybe he was actually not wrong, the music director. So it's, and I always when I do recordings, I always have open microphone. Like, I don't talk through the phone. I want them, the musicians, to immediately hear the sound engineer. That, of course, is the prerequisite for that is that I trust the sound engineer, and I choose these sound engineers where we have the same ideas about the
Yeah, where
pieces.
everyone's agreeing.
Yeah,
Absolutely. And how many years were you there in total?
13 years.
13. So that's
Yeah,
quite a transformation that you can make. By the
yeah.
time from when you got there to when you left, did you feel like the orchestra and you were a unit and you were on the same page and you understood each other?
Yes, and I would say I was quite proud that after 13 years we would still talk to each other. It's, that's not something you have to work on it. It's like a marriage, I have to say. I mean, and we would have we would have conflicts, of course, and sometimes I have to be strict. And I uh, occasionally was also the chief financial officer, so it was so I carried the whole responsibility, also legally, which was not a role I really enjoyed, but that's sometimes how it happens. And so I had to make difficult decisions sometimes, also personnel wise, and then you have to find a way how to communicate that. So
Absolutely.
how you communicate internally is very important for a good relationship. And I would say you always depend on musicians, and there are key players in an orchestra, who can break a relationship, or they want to collaborate. And I was very lucky. I had wonderful musicians in that orchestra who were intelligent and understood also sometimes my side of it. Like, we really try to work together. And I
Yeah.
would say one big difference to an American orchestra is that the unions in Germany have a lot of power. That gives orchestra musicians a certain feeling that they don't need to use the power they have. So one can actually find solutions which are more flexible. In the States, my experience is that because they're, the musicians can decide when the rehearsal ends. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but then
Yes.
that's what they will use, even if the phrase of a Brahms symphony needs
Right.
another 10 seconds. I was always for a strong participation of orchestra musicians. It's not always easy. I mean, it's not. But I find that then management and orchestras are more of a unit. Or,
Hmm. I think that's really important because that kind of challenge with the US orchestras, if you do have to end on the second and you're in the middle of the phrase, it removes you from the purpose of your being there and the purpose of the
Mm.
entire experience. And it becomes more job like and less craft like. So the fact that there is a more flexibility, I'm sure in the end is better for the orchestra.
But of course, I usually stopped my rehearsals 5 minutes early.
You've finished with your music directorship, and now you've been doing guest conducting and projects and all of these things.
Mhm.
And you just recently were appointed for a summer festival.
Indeed. Well, when you finish a music directorship, and I worked a lot, so I was keen of, actually, I first wanted to do a sabbatical. I thought it might be good just to have more time again to study the scores and go deeper into the literature. And but then it happened that somehow guest conducting gigs just came, and
Yeah.
so until 8th of March of this year. And
Yes.
then that was difficult because as a freelance conductor, there was absolutely nothing. But there is hope, I find. And so this is important. So this festival, appointment in Morton Classics Festival, it's a summer festival on a beautiful lake in Switzerland, was, of course, also kind of a wonderful thing. Lifesaver is too strong, but somehow gave me a perspective, gave me some things to do, so to plan.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, nobody knows. They had to cancel this year's festival, which was the last festival of my predecessor after 22 years. This is also not a very nice, ending.
No.
And so, but of course, we are in contact, etc. But I was able to plan again, make programs, and make sense, hopefully, of it all for this beautiful festival. It's 3 weeks and has 9 symphony concerts and a lot of and plus 2 galas with orchestras, chamber music, and the setting is absolutely stunning there.
That's going to be a really fun project for you and a great chance to try new things. And the summer festival is such a different experience from the daily work.
Yeah. Well, it's of course only part-time, it's 3 weeks. So,
Mm-hmm.
but I already sit I spend a lot of time. As you know, festival is a full-time job a lot of times.
It really is. It really is. So my last question for you, if you could do any project, if someone said, here's a limitless budget, you can have any people you want, anything you want, what is something that you've always wanted to record or do, or something that you've always had your sights set on?
I think this project of music and Gulag is really the one which drives me most, and which is also very challenging because one has to go to the archives in Russia, which I did, but just to make copies of the things cost a lot of money, and of course find sponsors for this topic is not easy. And so if ever somebody listens to this podcast and find that's a wonderful idea, so I'm very open to that. But there are still great composers who need to be heard again, and that's really
Yes.
something which that's why also I study Russian. I have started before Corona, but that was also something which really helped me during Corona. Bi-weekly lessons with a coach, and so this is wonderful.
It is, and there's so many voices who have not been captured or brought back,
Yeah.
that could be an entire section of your career, looking through and learning about more and more of these amazing musicians who we lost.
Yes.
Tremendous. Thank you so much for joining us and for sharing all of your stories.
Thank you very much for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you for joining us on Inside the Notes. Be sure to visit InsideTheNotes.com for additional content from our artists and guests, and click subscribe to stay up to date on future interviews. Until next time, this is your host, Erica Block.